Welcome to the Fabric Spotlight series, a series of talks with industry leaders and entrepreneurs on the cloud and IoT infrastructure topics. Today, it's my pleasure to have Sunil Potti, the Chief Product and Development Officer at Nutanix. Welcome, Sunil.
Rajan, good to see you again.
Same here, same here. We have known each other for probably 15 years.
Precisely 15 years, actually.
15 years, precisely, yes. And so I'd like to have seen your journey through a lot of different companies, but in your own words, would love to have you describe your personal journey and where you are. How did you get to be where you are today?
That would probably take us a lot more than the time that we have allocated, but I'll try to be brief. I think I started my journey mostly as a database guy and a system software guy at Sybase, and then got lucky getting into an early stage product in Cisco about building middleware in the network, which is where we met.
Yes.
In fact, it was one of my first large product failures, but frankly, that's how I became, I would say, infamous based on that. But and since then, had a couple of good stints at F5, and then had the privilege of working with some great people at Citrix to lead NetScaler to be a very large business. And then, as with any good things, I was fortunate to kind of join Nutanix at one of the earlier stages. I do still joke that the product market fit had already happened, the product initial customer pain points were already solved, product was actually working, and I just came to take all the credit, right? It was that stage, but in the last 4.5 years, it's been a great ride at Nutanix.
Fantastic. I mean, talk about the product market fit being there and everything being in place, but actually Nutanix went through quite a transformation to being a cloud company now. So how did that happen? What is the strategy, cloud infrastructure strategy? Could you describe that a little bit?
So I think if you just think about how Nutanix started, obviously some of this is in hindsight, some of it is luck, but a lot of it is also design. A lot of credit to the founding team and the initial team that actually built out the core value proposition. So if you think about Nutanix, what did we do? It was called hyperconverged infrastructure as a market category. It still is a new market category in infrastructure. And as you guys know, it's very hard to create new market categories these days. Most products are about building a next generation of something, just because the buying center is the same and you just solve the prior product's problems. Or you try to kind of basically say, hey, there's a new architecture or a new landscape. How do you bring the same kind of services to that new landscape, such as IoT is a good example. In IoT, you need security, you need automation, et cetera, et cetera. I think very few times, though, you actually have a groundbreaking, what I would call platform strategy. And we internally think about Nutanix as one of those companies that was born as a platform company, but went to market as a product. And what do I mean by that? So most companies either start as a product company to a particular use case, such as Salesforce, they solve sales. And then they add marketing support. And then over a period of time, they created a platform called Force.com and a whole bunch of things, right? So most companies that go from product to platform companies go through this iteration of product market fit, expand, and then add other things, right? Very few times large companies have born and they start with solving a platform problem, and 99.9% of the time they fail, just because they don't have the initial use case. Sometimes, though, you have a company like Uber that is born as a platform company. From day one, it solves a marketplace problem of supplying drivers to riders, and it has scaled always as that same platform company. Of course, it has scaled into new markets like Uber Eats and so forth, but ultimately those platform companies scale inorganically and organically because of the consumption of the platform. And what do I mean by that? And I'll tell you how it relates to Nutanix is initially Uber had their Uber Black, their own cars, and they supplied it to riders with this simplified experience of an app, right? And then as more and more riders came, they introduced more drivers, which is what they expanded the entire market opportunity, saying instead of just having 100,000 drivers, you now have millions of drivers, because you and I could be a driver. And by inserting new, if I can call it supply, into the marketplace, they created a lot more demand. Because now, every 2 minutes, there could be a driver right beside you. So why should I drive a car? So Nutanix had a similar birth, I would say, in growth, actually. It sounds odd, but when we introduced our original product, which was a scale-out file system, in reality, what we did was we actually created storage as a software app on a platform. So the analogy that we would always use was that when an iPhone came in, sure, it did a phone call, but it also gave you a browser. It also gave you a GPS device. It gave you a converged a bunch of hardware things that otherwise you carried on your person, rewrote them in software on one common operating system. So from the design of Nutanix was always about creating this operating system at the bottom. Storage happened to be our first app, and server virtualization. And that was called hyperconverged. And then as if I can call it, this new platform got consumed in the enterprise, we started adding more apps. So we added a little bit of security as an app, we added networking as an app, we added server virtualization with our own hypervisor, we added some database services. So these became apps with this curated app store called the enterprise app store, right? So the evolution of the company therefore came in a few phases, and I'll talk about where we're going. We call it 3 acts of the company. The first act was about building compute and storage as an app, but on a common operating system. People still call it hyperconverged, but it was about this beautifully designed one-click, like somebody could actually deploy a storage and a compute node for any VM in hours versus weeks using traditional infrastructure. Nowadays, pretty much all infrastructure inside the enterprise is consumed that way. But along the way, there was another experience that people saw called public cloud. And 4 or 5 years ago, public cloud was a destination. Cloud was meant to be going outside. What Nutanix then realized was public cloud's first app was also compute and storage. In fact, even these days, compute and storage is still a majority of their revenue, right? Indirectly, right? So we expanded our portfolio, just like public cloud expanded its portfolio to a bunch of other services. And the reason was many customers, when they were choosing cloud, they started realizing that cloud is no longer a destination, but an experience. But if I can go to public cloud, for some workloads make total sense. But for many workloads, there's a lot of friction to migrate to public cloud. And in fact, for economics or laws of physics, it's better to stay inside. So if somebody could give me 60-70% of that experience, I'd take it and then move on to other things. And that's really how Nutanix came to the second act, which was about bringing what I would call AWS inside. So the more you consume AWS outside, the more you want AWS inside. And then now, we are in a world of where we would want to make the AWS inside and the AWS outside look like one AWS. Basically, whether it's GCP, Azure, Amazon, or Nutanix inside, it should just look like it's one cloud. So that's the 3-phase journey, which is about creating this software-defined apps of compute and storage, then expanding that operating system to become a cloud inside, and then creating this harmonized operating system that works across public and private clouds.
Very nicely put. You actually preempted my next
A bunch
two
of
questions.
questions. Yeah, we can call it a wrap, go to lunch. Yeah.
The other thing, apropos to what you mentioned as apps on the cloud, what is the Nutanix viewpoint on security? Security is a big topic, not just because people are uncomfortable about security on public cloud. That problem has been addressed, I believe. But overall, in terms of security, it's a constantly evolving market. Where is Nutanix?
I think more so than even Nutanix, I'll just share some points of what we see out there, and then talk about a little bit about what we are doing, because we also have to know, like there's some famous movie star statements, where we have to know our limitations. So there are areas where we really double down on, and there's areas where we support. And security is one of those, like design, has been built in versus bolted on. So this construct called built-in security versus bolted-on security is a core premise that I personally, as well as I think our company, believes in. To the extent that we can offer built-in services for security, we do that. But in this new world, I think there's a massive opportunity for security to be reimagined. Not redesigned, but reimagined. And there's a big difference between those two, in my opinion. Redesigned is essentially saying, oh, I only do a layer 4 firewall. I need to do a layer 7 deep packet inspection. I'll do that. Redesigning is about, okay, I can't take my current firewall, put it as a virtual appliance on public cloud and call that cloud security. I need to redesign how my firewalling is done, given my various construct in GCP versus Amazon and so forth, right? But reimagining is, I think, taking it to the next level, in my opinion. And I think security is one of those areas where there's a fertile ground for reimagination, much like what has happened in the world of containers as a foundational reimagination of how people develop, deploy, and operate an application, right? I think similarly, security could be reimagined in a similar plane where it's not a post hoc vulnerability scan, day end kind of compliance operations. I think one vector of reimagination of security is that as apps get redesigned, you can move security way upstream into the development cycle. So just like dev and DevOps converge to DevOps, I think there is an emerging convergence of SecOps with DevOps. Call it whatever you want, right? So that's one dimension, is where as you are redesigning security using or applications using containers and whatever you call it, in the development lifecycle, deployment lifecycle, you can actually insert in new security capabilities that downstream you don't have to do all these other checks because the system is getting built-in security, if that makes sense. And then, of course, there's another layer of reimagination is basically, obviously, people talk about there's no more a perimeter and all that other stuff. So what's the new perimeter? Again, there also, I think, increasingly, if you start from first principles, and then the first principles means basically that in this new world, in fact, I don't know if you guys have seen all the latest facts say that malware is actually going down. Phishing is going up. In fact, I think there's data points saying something like, more than 90% of threats are actually where users give up their credentials. And that's how, threats come into the picture. So I think, it's a widely stated statement saying that a lot of people are focused on building better locks when they're leaving the windows open, right? And so in that dimension, I would say of reimagination, I think if you assume that any app, container, can be deployed in any cloud, but assume that there is no perimeter around them. Because in the classical world, apps can be deployed and there's a perimeter, so they don't become very secure. Built-in security says that there is never any perimeter. You could take an app, you could deploy it on the edge, you could deploy it on your data center, you can deploy it in public cloud. But when the app comes up and when they talk, there is this on-demand perimeters that are created. And they are created with some trust boundaries, and when the apps finish communicating or whatever, maybe the perimeter goes away, right? So there are various such examples of where I think that's another dimension of where security, authentication, authorization, perimeterless security is being redesigned. So those are just two examples, hopefully, of how security is being reimagined.
You talked about containers, and along those lines, where do you see applications going in terms of microservices, containers, serverless, all of these constructs which are coming along? How do you see that coming along?
Yeah. I think what we see out there from at least a Nutanix perspective, but I think it's pretty commonplace, is obviously when you have a greenfield app, pretty much these days everything is going to what I would call the cloud native stack. And again, even in cloud native, there is cloud native 1.0, there's cloud native 2.0 with serverless and functions, service, and so forth. And also the context of your app is important to determine the kinds of technology stacks that you will use, such as increasingly if you want to push intelligence to the edge, there's a certain level of cloud native stacks that you use versus if you're trying to actually build a mission critical application, but it's a greenfield application, right, in the public cloud or private cloud. I think in the public cloud, clearly we see a lot more of, if I can call it, redesign or new in this new microservices based architecture, where I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity, but also criticality for enterprises to say is that how do I look at all my existing, which is paying my bills, and I still want to get to this end game, which I now believe has value because I've tested it out with my greenfield applications, right? And that is going to be an interesting challenge, right? And in some ways, virtualization didn't redesign an app, right? You took an app and you packaged it into a virtual machine. Sure, you changed a few things, but you never rewrote the code, right? Whereas in the world of microservices and cloud native applications, the spirit of the upside is not achieved if you don't redesign, right? If you just re-platform is what we said, which is run the containers on the same platform as VMs, there's value. We do that, by the way. We bring security, we bring storage, and a whole bunch of other capabilities to containers so that they can start being treated as mission critical services, which is what Nutanix does. But I think there's a whole bunch of other capabilities that's needed to kind of redesign your existing VMs, sort of like VMs to Kubernetes, right? Kind of technologies that are needed to kind of bridge the gap.
Now, in terms of staying with the topic of microservices and redesigning VMs to microservices, what do you think of the performance aspect of these? Given the fact that there are multitude of different services, I'm sure performance assurance could be an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, whenever there is a transition of architectures, Rajan, right, there's opportunity slivers. And some of those slivers are, tens of millions of dollars, some are billions of dollars. You just have to figure out if the sliver is sustainable, enduring, and so forth, right? And performance assurance, in general, enterprise grade or managing this migration while preserving enterprise grade isms is definitely points of opportunity. Security is one of them. Yeah. Performance obviously is one of them, right? I think in general, I would say that there's ample sort of need or opportunity there around performance assurance. Question will be around is how much of that is a true painkiller versus a vitamin? As in, is it a temporary thing that's the platform guys will figure it out? So because whichever platform that I'm running on, over a period of time gets better and better, right? Maybe it's just like virtualization was not the same speed as bare metal maybe 10 years ago, but with various technology advancements such as SRIOE and a whole bunch of other things, people have actually found, reasonably fast optimization. So the question would be, how much of this is as a temporal opportunity was a permanent opportunity?
So you think people like App Dynamics and New Relic ought to be worried about?
Yeah, no. So I think, because the moment you deal with application performance, it's a different problem in general because, and in some ways, everybody's going to a more holistic approach of managing not just apps, but infrastructure and security and a whole bunch of things associated with performance management. But yeah, I mean, I think in general, everybody has to look at, as apps get reimagined, some of the capabilities that they provided get sucked into the platform, right? So if you look at microservices with leverage of Istio or, some of the intermediate brokering technology, a lot of this visibility monitoring capabilities can be provided. Prometheus is a good example of that and all, right? Yes. So clearly, just like security, things are getting built in. Yes. So that these bolt-on apps don't need to be as heavyweight, right? So in that world of performance assurance, similarly, people need to now look at systems management or any of those products as like, really how thick is that layer? Because a lot of that is actually being covered in the platform.
Got it. I mean, we talked about multi-cloud. We talked about having hybrid cloud along these lines. Now the new buzz is both edge and 5G. Where do you see that? And how does that impact the strategies as you look forward to that?
Yeah, I don't know much about 5G, so I'll stay silent on that because I'm at best not even dangerous. But on edge, we clearly have a point of view in Nutanix about what the edge should be. But the way we think about it, if you just take a step above, is that cloud as an experience, because it's not a destination anymore, has to be contextualized to where that experience is being delivered from. Therefore, cloud cannot be one or two form factors. It cannot just be a public cloud that's globally distributed, large scale. It also cannot just be private cloud in the data center, just because there'll be maybe few of those. It also needs to be something what we call distributed, where because Coca-Cola has a lot of bottling plants, manufacturing sites. They need small clouds there, right? But then it needs to go all the way to the edge, where a rig in an oil and gas company has some intelligence where there can be some decision made, right? And obviously, connected cars is a good example of that. And you can take that continuum all the way to the edge, quote unquote, right? Our point of view is that the operating system, to some extent, capabilities shouldn't be the same fat operating system in them, but many elements of the control plane should continue preferably from one end to the other end, because that's how you get economies of scale of how you actually push out updates, how day one upgrades are being done, how monitoring is being done, how event cataloging is being done. Those are all ideally, for an enterprise perspective, should be harmonized. The data plane, though, should obviously be different, because what you run as a function as a service and how it stores data should be different from how SAP HANA stores data and stuff like that, right? So I think Edge ideally will start as its independent, best-in-class form factor or construct, but like if we, from how we see it over a period of time, as it becomes more popular, it needs to align with the best of suite of, hey, I have one single control plane, how do I actually have common ways to kind of upgrade things at the edge versus in my branch office versus data center.
Got it. And talk about edge, and continuing on the theme of the edge, where does IoT fit in that construct, and how does Nutanix see it?
Yeah. So we have a IoT platform built around us. So we think about edge as a broader construct of what I would call a cloud form factor, and then there is various apps again. And it turns out that some of those apps are segments in themselves, and IoT is a segment. And so, for example, we have a very large customer that we've talked about that is trying to digitize the cafeterias. Mm-hmm. So if we have a very large cafeteria company in the world, they have, I don't know, thousands of locations. People put food on the trays and they check out, right? Mm-hmm. Now, Amazon has sort of talked about this new experience for retail, which is Amazon Go, right?
Yeah.
Which is people come, they service themselves, there's nobody in this thing. The system is, first of all, having various sensors or various levels of IoT intelligence where I know what my things are at various points. I know if you buy something, I can give you a promotion to do something else. I can auto check out, I can verify, and oh, by the way, I have an app where I can see how many, what my money is. There's it's a true digital experience, right? What about bringing something like that to your cafeteria experience? Mm-hmm. Because your cafeterias have lines and all that stuff, and all the objects are well known, salads versus food and all. Yes. So can they tag them, put them on a tray, and can something scan it, give you the receipt and the back end, and maybe there's one person as an exception, but pretty much the entire cafeteria experience is digitized. So that thing, as an example, runs on a Nutanix Edge node, controlled by a global network, and talking to what I would call a central cloud, right? And so that's an example of how I would say IoT as a practical application is helping, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Welcome to the brave new world, both exciting, scary.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're definitely looking forward to see these transitions. I think the way we think about it is, and probably something for the entrepreneurs and the innovators is, all problems worth solving are hard problems. Right? And it'll be unclear as to what the market opportunity is on day one. And so your goal should be to kind of get to product market fit as quickly as possible or fail fast, right? And then once you get to product market fit, how do you then focus on scaling? Then how do you focus on hiring? How do you focus on getting to the next product market, and all that stuff, right? So to us, like things like Edge, next generation cloud native services are all hard problems to solve. I think if we come up with easy solutions, then we're either not identifying the problem correctly or it's not worth solving.
So as we wrap up this discussion, what is your advice to entrepreneurs? You have had a rich set of experience. You have scaled, part of being a company which has scaled dramatically. As you meet young entrepreneurs or maybe older entrepreneurs, what is your advice to them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'll have to be a little, if I can call it, cautious, because I'm not an entrepreneur that has done something from day zero onwards. And to me, I have a lot of respect for entrepreneurs in general, because I think they are the caliber who jump off a springboard and they're not really sure if there's water below or not. And they have to make stuff up, either to make a parachute before they land or to find a pool in the way that actually has enough water, right? I know it's a loose analogy, but and some of us are more comfortable at least knowing that there's water and then jumping out, knowing that you still need swimming skills and diving skills or whatever. But what I've seen, though, having been in Nutanix, for example, or a few other companies where many entrepreneurs started it and they've grown with it, are a few characteristics. I think the first, probably the thing that I learned a lot from the Nutanix founding team itself, our founder CEO Rajan, and also a bunch of our engineers who took the risk when you didn't need to, is at every stage of the company you have to scale yourself faster than the company. And the only way to do that is two-pronged. One, you have to learn faster than what your current company is learning. So this ability to continuously learn is a huge differentiator, in my opinion, in companies that have gone exponentially like this versus tapped up. The second thing is you as a person, he or she is just one person, but if you can replicate yourself with 3 others, 5 others, then you get scale, right? So the other thing is high quality, continuous hiring. Mm-hmm. So there's continuous learning and high quality, continuous hiring. If you can get those two right, rest of the downstream stuff like market issues, product issues, people issues will get figured out.
Wonderful. Sunil, this was one of a very good talk and excellent advice. Thanks very much. And to the audience, stay tuned for another exciting episode which should be coming up in the Fabric Spotlight series.